Dr. Ira Seidenstein,
Yeah,
welcome to the podcast.
thank you so much, Julie.
It's a thrill having you here. You're actually joining me all the way in Australia,
Yeah, Brisbane.
Brisbane.
Yeah, that's in
I don't
Queensland.
know Australia very well. Is that on the East Coast?
It's on the east coast. It's a little bit north of Sydney, but it's way south of what we call the top end, and it's kind of like the Florida, for lack of a better understanding of the kind of climate. But it's
Okay.
very mountainous, whereas Florida's flat. But we're a subtropical region.
Now, you don't have a thick Australian accent. Are you originally from Australia?
No, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where the pawn shop on the corner song is about. And I've lived most of my adult life in Australia now, but I have lived in a few other places, and I also lived a few places in the U.S. before I skedaddled in uh, August 1979. I
Oh, wow.
decided to take a risk and bought a one-way ticket and went to Europe, and I've been gone more or less ever since.
And why did you settle in Australia?
I came here. I had contracts, so I came here as a touring artist a few times, and a number of people wanted me to stay here and thought I should set up my method, my work here. Two of them were what we call, let's say, Anglo Aussies, and two of them were indigenous um, older people, but they were people who lived in the city. And so
Okay.
those four people really wanted me to move here and felt that that would be the right thing.
It's interesting because I interviewed a woman by the name of Julie McInnes who played the cello and was one of the vocal artists with Cirque du Soleil, and she's originally from Australia. And she
Mhm.
was telling me during our interview that Australia at the time was giving out musical instruments to students. I'm
Wow.
curious to know now you're primarily into the performing arts, theater, clown world.
Yeah.
What is the state of culture in Australia today?
Um, my experience of it when I came here in the first time was 81, but when I moved here, it was 85, and it was very, very vibrant and growing. The arts and the support for the arts and the variety was quite quite exceptional in and the variety in genres and um, and there was quite a bit of support. But what also happens, and this is I think probably a international issue, is there was more and more trainings for more and more artists and less percentage of work available. And also, there was consequently less and less percentage of people that were going to be awarded an art grant. So even though it's was from my point of view, it was very, very rich and not in money terms, but vibrant and growing. There, you could see that there was a disaster coming, and
Hmm.
and it's not I wouldn't call it a horrible disaster. I mean a disaster only in the sense that there was more people with certifications with less and less experience and less chance for those people to find a way of getting their toe in the doors.
So did that make for a more, I guess, exploratory community where people just because they didn't have jobs or as many jobs, they just explored new things? Did they innovate more or did they stagnate?
It was actually, yeah, it was more stagnating in this, and it was particular because, and I saw this evolving, that the grant applications used to be looser, and then as their process um, refined, and also as there were more people applying, the arts councils had to make more specificity about who could or should get a grant, and And so people started orienting their work, a lot of people, not everyone, but certainly a lot of people started orienting their work to get a grant. And that, to me, was the antithesis of how we actually work as artists. And I'm
Yeah,
not
you're
saying
very
that
right
artists
about
aren't
that.
organized, but I can say the creative process is actually an unknown, even in the best of circumstances. And even if I use the example of the most commercial, like in the U.S. Broadway scene, they were very, very creative people, creating the musicals and even the play productions. And they would take a show to smaller cities for 2 months and try things out, and they would make adjustments and they would change things from one day to the next to improve. Um, so, so there was really this authentic creative process going on, and and I think that it got interfered with through the bureaucracy.
I've seen a bit of that in Canada, but mostly where the arts became almost an academic domain,
That's right.
where,
Yes.
you're talking about the grants in Australia. It's the same thing in Canada. You can't really get a grant unless you have a BFA or an MFA or, some sort of graduate program or graduate degree. So artists who are naturally born artists don't have a fighting chance to get financial support.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also I thought about this recently, and I wanted to. I don't know if we're going to touch on some of my projects that I created, let's say directed, but created, and I I like to work in a kind of collaborative way, even though I really guide it and am a strong director, in fact, but I actually work collaboratively. But I have this. Horrible, what I would call a syndrome, which I now call the Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland syndrome, which is, hey kids, come on, let's go out in the backyard and make a show. And I have this I have this ability that if you just give me any actor or four actors or 20 actors and a studio with nothing in it, I can make a show. Now, I'm not saying it'll be a great show, but it'll be good. It'll be interesting and it'll be creative. So I think that again, I think that the authentic processes of the artists are interfered not only through bureaucracy, but also, as you're pointing out, through the academia and having, and they're caught trying that their work is to analyze work. That's the academic world. That's their function and that's their beauty, is that they analyze how does this writer work. But then when you codify it, we're in a big malaise because if I go again to playwriting, for example, but it can apply to novelists or anybody creating. But if you took, let's say, 20 successful um, playwrights, say 10 women and 10 men who have produced and everything, and you talk to them about their creative process, you would see there's extreme diversity in approaches, how they schedule themselves, how they work with their subconscious, how they work with their conscious. So when you get caught codifying or art, we're in a bit of difficulty. So then you're faced with the problem as a teacher or somebody setting a curriculum out. How do you set it up in a way that can assist the person who wants to develop their art or as an artist or to experience, even if it's, let's say, a scientist who decides this year they want to experience painting. So how do they go about it, or who guides them? So these are big questions. And we think we people thought, like in the universities and the arts bureaucracies, thought that they came up with an answer, and we had to give in to that if you wanted to get your grant or if you wanted to get support.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost, I think you've explained the reasons why we can understand why they tried something, right? I mean, like you said, it's that that's what they're into. They're into analyzing and creating structure for society, and naturally the arts are going to get caught up into that. But I am curious because it changes, at least in Canada, from city to city. For example, I lived in Montreal for 3 years, where it is absolutely normal for artists to create projects, like you said, to get 10 people together and put up a show in somebody's garage
Hmm.
or in the middle of the street. It's very normal. And then I moved back to Ottawa, Ontario, the capital of Canada, where it is abnormal to do so. So I do wonder sometimes if it comes down the people, to the people who make up a city. And does the impact between the bureaucracy and the city culture? Sometimes the city culture can outwin the bureaucracy, right?
Yeah, and on the not on the other hand, but also in relation to that, um, I was thinking about this recently. Is that the avant-garde theater had the one of the places where it excelled was in Paris. Another place was in New York City, in the Lower East Side. So in the middle of this, the most commercial place in the world, which was New York, you had this. Maybe it's a reaction to that, but you had the living theater. I think even in the 40s they began. Um, Judith Malina and I forgot his name, her partner, Julian Beck. So they started, I think, in the 40s, and they, even if they were with us today, they would be seen as the most extreme experimental theater artists even today. But they were really engaged with a lot of things about society and politics, and also the the nature of artists, and the nature of what is it to be human, and what is it to have community. All those questions. They were they weren't just farting about. They were deeply passionate about where's the world going, where's the society going, and what is it to be an artist. And we're the ones who have the voice, Julie. So if we want to make a show, well, we can nothing can stop us, but we may not be able to survive doing that. But
Yeah, that's a very good point.
there's two separate things, so nothing is stopping me from doing whatever I want to do. Now, whether or not I can find the means to do that or to survive while I'm doing that, that's another question. But those are actually two different questions, and we often mix them up. And the show that goes on in someone's garage, and it might have a dozen people who come and see it. That's every bit as valid as a blockbuster show from Toronto. Is also a big theater city and musical theater city, and a blockbuster that might play to 1,000 people a night for 2 years. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's also nothing wrong with making a show and only 12 people attend. This is the art world is very big, and there's room for everyone. There's not necessarily support for everyone, but there's room for everyone. And we need importantly though, is we need the artists to actually be true to their artistic instinct and their passions. A society needs that, and too often we give up to um, for survival reasons, or we give up our integrity in our true spirit, and we adjust that in a kind of a survival commercial way. And I'm not against that. I'm just saying that we lose something when the artist um, gives up on their own merit.
Yeah, it's interesting because I also interviewed Jacqueline Van de Geer, who's a Dutch performance artist in Montreal, and she was saying that she always, throughout her long career in the arts, as a performance artist, is that she always, sometimes would have to take contracts where she would address the hierarchy of needs. In other words, she
Mhm.
would sometimes do work that just paid the bills because she needed to pay her rent that month. But
Yeah,
you're right that sometimes, when artists have to do that, there is something missing sometimes.
yeah, and I think that she's right on the money because you have to negotiate with yourself what is the purpose of this project, whether it's to earn money and pay the rent for the next 2 years, which is fine, or is it to see what do I want to create? What's coming out of me at the moment? What's emerging from me? So if we can be more clear, if the artist or the individual, even if they're not an artist but they want to explore the arts, if they can be a little bit more, um, let's say, Cartesian, if they can separate the chaff from the wheat a little bit, then everything is working in a good way. I think it's when they get mixed up and when we lose that real artistic integrity that the society loses.
Yes, I agree. And I love that we actually started off with this kind of conversation because you've had such a prolific career in the arts. On your website, it says that you've worked at Cirque du Soleil.
Yeah,
You've also worked on 140 live productions and
yeah,
probably more, I'm sure.
yeah.
Um, let's start here at Cirque, just because it is probably the most recognizable, production. It's one of the most recognizable in the world.
Yeah,
And, were you an actor there or were you a teacher?
I was both. I was a performer. I came in. Um, the first contract I had was um, a development week that they do before they make a show, and I was called to be actually the lead character for Kuza, what became Kuza, which is a great show, but it hadn't been it hadn't gone into rehearsal yet. And then in the process of the week, a lot of things change. So in the end, the 17 people that came, only one person actually ended up being in the touring show, in the show. And so things change. And then 2 years later, I was contacted again because they had been looking, trying to find, they do really work hard to try to find the right role for the right person and the right person for the right role. And so they found something finally that they thought I could come into. And it was a show that already existed, which was a beautiful show, Corteo. So I came in as what's called a replacement contract. And I was to come in and perform, but also, given my background teaching, they also were interested for me to teach things, whatever it is I teach, um, to the troupe when I was in it. And they also wanted the original call was for me to help develop the two clown characters. Okay. But when you get in, it's a whole different thing because things change. One thing about Cirque du Soleil, anybody who's in it, you can go, things change. So as much as they have to hold it together for at least 10 years and they want things to stay as they were formed in the creation process, there's also, it's a big company and it's human and there's a lot of things that do change. So I came in and I finished my replacement contract the end of the year. It was up till the last performance of 2007, and then that was it. And in the after that, the managers of that show recommended me to Cirque when Cirque came to Australia. I was always recommended to teach. Um, so I don't know if that I don't know uh, what your question wants to focus on. I'm just explaining a little
No,
bit what I
well,
did
I
there.
was curious, because
That's
I
what I
I
did
like
there.
to yeah, I like to tell people about, some of the major experiences people have had because they can, relate to a big brand name, right?
Yeah,
And also I was curious because the people who have worked with Silk, especially the ones that worked for Silk very early on in their career, tend to credit Cirque du Soleil for giving them a kind of structure. And I was really curious to see if you felt the same way or if you absolutely hated working within, kind of a big company structure?
The thing is, I really loved. I think Cirque is an incredible company, and if you understand what they actually transformed in the world of circus, then what they did historically is absolutely extraordinary. And there's so many great independent companies that have come from them that we have to understand that it gave birth to a major creative revolution in contemporary circus. And I mean, really, there's great artists and great troops that have had their experience there, and then they created their own thing. So, okay, so I think Cirque is a really great company. There's issues which have a lot to do with when you're in a corporation. There were 5,000 employees when I was in it. There were over 1,200 or maybe even 1,500. Um, I think there were over 1,200 performers at that time. So there were nearly 20 shows in either in development or in on tour, and there were I think 1,500 people working in the building itself in Montreal. So these are everything from uh, they have their own post office to shoemakers and hat makers and cooks um, when I was there, they were also making a shift, and they had 25 managers, and so it was 1,500 people like that. Plus, um, Cirque created a lot of independent work for people in Montreal and Quebecois to have supporting industries. Um, like making things and making materials. And then, of course, it it changed around that time. That was 2007. So it was also in a process of change where they had this 25 managers. So of course they were coming in to help it to tie its bottom line mentality, if it makes sense,
Right. Well, I
because
mean,
it's changing.
it's almost like an IBM at that point.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was like that, but it was remarkable too that it had a very, very um, unique, um, personable approach to the thing, which is very Quebecois. It's very Canadian, but also very Quebecois. So I really enjoyed it from the point of being in a Canadian company. It's also a North American, and it's also an international company. But also, there's no question that it was a Quebecois, or for me, it was discovering what that is, a
Mm,
Quebecois approach to life. And
right.
so that the company was imbued with that, and I cherished that experience. And then you're in a challenging situation just as an individual performer. I was with 63. There were 63 performers in Corteo. That's a lot of people, Julie. you know,
Mhm.
and and that's a lot of personalities. So you have to have a management team that can hold it together, because 63 performers are not going to hold it together. And there
That's
and
wild.
yeah, and
I mean, that's
you have
wild.
yeah yeah
I was just wanted to stay on this number for a second here. 63 people. I think there's a lot of people that go to a Cirque du Soleil show and you see all the acrobats and all the dancers, and you don't realize that in total on that stage there's a rotation of just under 100 people. So, like you said, that's a lot of personalities.
yeah. There's there at that time. I think that was about around the average, and that would include the 63 would include about 6 musicians. Then you had in the whole show, including the 63 performers, you had a total of about 145 people, including box office cooks, security, admin, technicians, so many technicians, wonderful technicians, stage manager, um, people working light and sound, and prop masters, prop makers. You had 3 physios, Um, and I think that was pretty normal for any of the Cirque shows. Very important, of course. And so it was, I think, about 145 people in the
Wow.
ensemble, and 60.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's a big, big commercial, product, let's say. Now, your other shows, your other 140 live productions,
Yeah.
were they mostly small, medium projects?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, I would kind of say the majority, which might mean 60% were, and a lot of those were my own creations. They could be solo, they could be duo, they could be a small group. I made my own works also for groups of 15 people. Like I wrote a play about August Strindberg, the great Swedish playwright. And when I was living in Sweden and I wanted to research him and I found him very interesting. And then I was inspired and I made this play, and that was for 15 actors. And we took it to five small cities up near the Arctic Circle. So from Luleå and Kiruna, which is above the Arctic Circle, and actually we made it in Kiruna, so we took it down below the Arctic Circle to Luleå, which was about 100, maybe 100 miles beneath the Arctic Circle, and then three other northern cities, which is a fantastic project and experience. So a lot of my shows were like that, my own creations. And then I was in plays. I've been in a couple of musicals, not like on Broadway, but three three main musicals. I was in Chicago in a small city, and that was a great experience. And so it's quite a freelance variety of things. The other famous company that I was in, well, I was in a couple, but I was in the Australian Opera. There I
Oh,
was an acrobat, and that was in an incredible show of Romeo and Juliet, and it was directed by a very famous Australian called Sir Robert Helpman. He was in the famous movie The Red Shoes, and
okay.
that's well worth seeing. I think it was made around 1948. It's a great movie, artistic movie, and so I worked with him directly, and then I was in what's called the Bell Shakespeare Company, which is kind of like Australia's national touring company, so to speak. And I was also hired to help establish it. I wasn't the founder. The founder is John Bell and his wife Anna Volska. But after they had it going for a bit over a year, I was hired to help establish it as a ensemble, and I also acted in it, and I co-directed Richard III. I did most of the stage direction, the, the
Is
vision.
that
Yeah,
is that
sorry.
what led you to actually take on directing full time? Is it, getting a taste of it, as you were also an actor?
Yeah, I was a performer, and then I would, even when I was, like, at the mime school and, you wanna make something with friends, and they'd always say to me after we'd work a little bit, they said, "Why don't you direct?" So people had the feeling right away that I could direct in a good way, not because I was a bossy boots, but because I would just work in a way, and also I worked with other people's creativity. I wasn't a one-man band at all, but I could drive it a bit. And so for, I think, almost 10 years, I was working as a director without ever really calling myself a director. It's just that I was
Mm.
asked to direct it. And then very often mostly, I was also performing in it. And then at some point, I was at university, and a number of the professors saw what I could do, and they said, "You should become a director. You should direct," because I was assisting them in productions, and I was usually called in as a movement coach, but I would always speak up about character or text or acting. I was a bit ballsy, but I was
Hmm.
I was polite. I said, "Could I say something?" and I would do that. So and I would only do that because I was so used to creating collaboratively, where everybody's voice in the room is as valid as the director. It's just the director is just a function. Like if you're playing the husband in a show and I'm playing the wife, well, nobody's in charge. We're creating it. So I came to directing organically, actually, and it, and it, and then finally I was a director without acting in something, and that was an interesting experience because it kind of makes you sick because I thought this is why directors die because you're watching the actors on stage and even if they're wonderful, you're just having a conniption because as a performer, you want to do something about whatever is changing or going wrong. So you have this visceral thing, like you have to get up on stage and you don't do that, but I'd be in the lighting and sound booth running the lights or sound, and I was going through hell. And then I went, whoa, you got to learn to separate. And then eventually I, became very good at that, but I did it because I understood it was a health issue, that's how directors get unwell. Um,
Ah, yeah.
and then I worked other times again as a just as an actor, which is great, or sometimes just as a choreographer, a movement consultant, something like that. And then I'd be hired again as a director. And so it was nice. It was a creative way. The other, I just want to, if you don't mind me spitting it out. So the other large company I worked with was Slava's Snow Show.
Oh, of
So that's
course.
the great Russian theater company run by Slava Polonin and his wife, and it's a great, great, great show. And I first saw it in 1999 in Montreal. My first time to Montreal, and I didn't know anything about Slava or Snow Show, whatever. There was a festival on. I think it was the Laugh Festival, Rear, and anyways, I
Oh,
just saw this poster with a clown's photo, and I thought, "Oh, what's that?" And I went to see it. I really liked it a lot, and I found it kind of mysterious because I had never really quite seen something quite like that. And then I saw the show a few times in a few different countries, and eventually I met Slava and his wife, and met them a couple of times. And then um, one time, this is a crazy story, but I won't bore you unless you ask me to. But coincidentally, they were in Paris and they were about to open, and I was lost this one morning because I was supposed to have meetings and they got canceled, and my friend who lived near wasn't home, and I didn't know what to do with myself. And I remembered that Slava's show was opening at a theater right near, so I dropped by and to see if they were there, and I'd say hello, and they were there. And to make a long story short, after we were talking about for 10 minutes with a cup of tea, he asked me if I'd like to be in Snow Show. And I actually first thought he was joking, but his wife was looking at me this weird way, and I kept talking like I'm doing now. And she looked at me and she kind of nodded her head towards Slava and shrugged her shoulders. And I looked at him, I looked at her, I looked at him, I looked at her, I looked at him. I said, "Did you mean actually to be in the show?" And he said, "Da, da, yes." I said, "Yeah." So, so we discussed it right on the spot. We made let's say, the contractual agreement when it was, what period he wanted me for, and what I was to be paid, and whatever arrangements there were, transportation and accommodation, stuff like that. And then that was it. It was unbelievable, Julie. And
yeah.
and I cherished it deeply. Like I cherished being in the Bell Shakespeare Company and the opportunity. I cherished being in Cirque du Soleil, especially being in Corteo, which show I love, and to be in Snow Show. It was like a dream come true in a way. But I don't. I'll come back to the numbers, like you asked me about being in Cirque and being independent or being structured. It's not that I mind the structure, it's that I don't fit in. So I could be in the best situation, best companies, and I have been in a few. And as much as I love it, and in some way I fit like a glove, there's a part of me that's like uh, a square peg in a round hole. So I
Yeah, it's
actually
not for everyone.
no, no,
I know a lot of, I know I've made a lot of contacts in the arts throughout the years, and I've met a lot of people who have been with big companies their entire life. Some of them are in the film industry. They're, working on, high level productions, and they're happy there. They belong there. They like their roles, and it's good for them. And I've also met some that are like in that world, but don't wanna be. You know?
yeah,
It's just that they can't find perhaps any equivalent, paying work outside of that, and then there are people like you who said, "You know what? Thank you very much. I love this experience, but I'm done."
yeah,
So,
yeah.
it's interesting though when you started your story about meeting Slava, or rather being invited to be in his show, it made me think immediately of someone else that I met in the clown world, and I don't know if you know her. Do you know Gina Bastoni?
Ah, I know of her, certainly. She also
Yeah.
went to Dell'Arte, but at a different time. But I know that she's
Yeah.
wonderful. You know, I know I don't know her, but I've just heard great things about her.
Well, Gina, it's interesting because Gina is the most eccentric person I've ever met in my life, but she has a wealth of stories from being on the road with Silk for I don't know how many years. I don't know if she was with them for 20 years, but,
Oh my
like,
god.
she performed for, like, Michael Jackson, she performed for, all these famous celebrities, and she just has story after story after story, and I guess that's what happens when you're a touring artist, right? I mean, you
Yeah,
just collect stories.
and also in circus is a particular because my 3rd performance was a Saturday, this when I was actually brought into the show, took time, took rehearsals, and yeah, anyways, that was a whole process, but my 3rd performance was a Saturday, so you have 2 shows, you have a matinee and you have an evening performance, and after the matinee and I'm still new, so I was, maybe I was doing something, but everybody had already skedaddled. That was actually my first matinee, so everybody had scooted to eat, and I wasn't sure if I had to take off my makeup or if I had to do this or what do I do in a matinee, so I didn't know, and I was just to leave the, artist tent, and I thought I'll go over to eat, and, standing outside was this, woman who with 3 children, and I said, "Are you okay?" Because you can't have people unescorted on the circus property because it's actually dangerous. There's things to
Right.
trip over and stuff like that. So it's actually a legal insurance thing. So I said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Are you with somebody?" And she said, "Well, she she went somewhere." And I said, "Well, come in here," because I got her and the kids in. Now this lady happened to be someone you might have heard of, which is Kate Blanchett. So
Oh my
so
goodness.
so so I'm just talking to her to stall for time because I shouldn't leave them there, and I have to find somebody else. So I was just trying to understand what her situation was, and she was gonna be given a tour with her kids, but that person, for some reason, maybe they went to the toilet or maybe they went to get her and the kids some juice or something, and so I just was chatting to her for a couple minutes till the escort finally came back. And, so it's absurd, so I'm sure Gina that's me on day 3, so if Gina was in, is that her name, Gina, the clown?
Yeah, Gina Bastoni. Yeah,
Yeah,
for
if
sure.
Gina
Yeah, I
Bastoni was
mean
in for years, and she would have 8,000 of these stories.
exactly. Ira, I don't want to miss out on speaking about your teaching because we have about 20 minutes left, and I
Okay,
think we should devote it to that.
okay.
You are an arts theater teacher, acting teacher. You have your own methods. I know that you have the Seidenstein method. You mentioned to me earlier you have the quantum method. Tell me a little bit about the methods you've developed and why.
Well, the main thing is the actual method is called quantum theater slapstick to Shakespeare, and somebody suggested, um, let's say 9 years ago, I should start to call it by my name, but in the end, I prefer quantum theater slapstick to Shakespeare. So it was my way of having been involved in the performing arts already for um, nearly 30 years by that time, and seeing lots of different things. And I had an idea that there was a different approach that I was interested in, that I had been developing all along, that was not antagonistic towards the different methods. Because a lot of times it doesn't matter whether it's acting or directing or clowning or whatever it is in the theater, that people can be quite antagonistic, and it's like, your sport team versus someone else's sport team. It's not that it's any better; it's that it's yours. So I wanted to see what is underlying all of these different methods for acting, theater, and clown. What is it? What are the universal principles? And I'm not the only one who thought that, but I took a kind of a scientific approach, in that I only wanted the underlying principles. I didn't want the aesthetics. I didn't want my preferred way of what I like to see on stage, or what I like to perform, or what I like to direct. I was looking at some other kind of direct conduit of an individual human's creativity manifest towards acting or theater or performance or clown. And so that's how I started to develop my method. Does that make
And
sense?
where do you teach it? Yeah, where do you
Oh,
teach it?
well, I've taught it in a lot of places and a lot of situations, but for from let's say from 2008 to 2019, I did, oh my god, I must have done at least 35 workshops in Paris.
Hmm.
So, and whenever I would teach in Paris, I would go to some other cities as well. Like I might go to London, I might go to Glasgow, I might go to Dublin or Belfast, and Aberystwyth in Wales. I might go to Stockholm, Berlin, Vienna, different places. But Paris, because of coincidence, meeting a person who was interested in my work and was able to help um, organize studios for me. And he's now my very close friend and associate, Casper Shelbred of Paris. He he helped me to organize these workshops in Paris, and from there I did many other workshops elsewhere. So that's where I was teaching it mostly for those years, and I taught it at different places. A lot of different places, and I've taught it also under very differing circumstances. That's also what I taught when I was in Corteo, and I would teach. That the performers come up and they could see what I could do or how I did things, and they'd say, "Could you teach me blah blah blah?" And another person might come up and they'd say, they'd just do it individually, spontaneously. Ira, do you know da 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 da? I said, yeah. Could you teach me some of that? I said, okay. So my approach is this quantum method, and here's where the I'm not a scientist at all, right? And I'm not really educated in science. It's not my forte, but I really love the lay books, the principles that I was reading about in quantum physics and quantum mechanics. But I just extracted a few things. For instance, everything is energy potential. Okay, so that's the quanta, is this potential of energy. The other thing is, this is a key one, Julie. The observer affects the observed. So what I had seen, for example, in clown, there's a lot of problems with teaching clown, and it's not easy to teach clown or acting or Shakespeare. The challenges are there, but if you have 10 clown teachers who have very different views on clowning, and they tell the people in their workshop, this is what a clown is, and this is what a clown isn't. So if the performer, the actor, or the person trying to discover clowning does something that doesn't fit in with the observer's viewpoint, then what the performer is coming up with is negated very often. And it's negated not necessarily outwardly, it's negated in a subtle way. So what I'm saying is that in in teaching, the mind of the teacher really can affect the learner. And 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 you can use that in a positive way, but unfortunately it also, if you don't control that, then the learner is coming up with things that might be a discovery that you don't know, and you have to be sensitive to that. Or you can be clear with them, this is what I'm doing, but this is what you're doing, and then we can negotiate that. So I think that that's my teaching approach, is that I enter a room with the individuals, and I have a structure and things and exercises, and the creative exercises have very simple structures, very simple, only a couple of steps. But what comes up, oh, that's the magic that I'm interested in, and that's the magic of that person's encounter with that exercise and with those instructions. So the thing they're learning is the thing they're doing. It's their encounter with the material. It's not the material itself. It's not an outward goal. It's not an end goal. It's the actual experience of being there, present, and from that, then that's really artistic. That your subconscious is working, your conscious is interplaying with it, and that's what my teaching's about.
It's really interesting that you point out, the differences in the kinds of teachings that are happening in the clown world because this is very personal to me. I had a really horrible experience in the clowning community where at a specific workshop, the teacher reduced some students to tears. Some of the stuff that you were doing was just not right according to their perception, and it was almost a form of belittling the students, and it was just very distasteful, and it wasn't something that would ever nourish or encourage creativity. And what I like about what you're doing is that you're breaking it down to its most basic element, you
Yeah,
know?
it's the DNA. It's the cellular level. It's the cosmic level. It's the quantum level that is the space where that person can deal with their issues as well, deal with their encounter.
Right.
It's like going for a hike in the mountains in the middle of the winter. Then you're encountering the elements. You're not just going for a la-di-da walk in the park. And it's the encounter that when you come back, you feel invigorated if you survived and didn't get eaten by a bear in Canada. But but also you have this opposite thing that's happened, Julie, which is that some clown teachers will now try to be so nice and so supportive and so huggy, and it's just like, well, it's not one or the other, it's something else. And and we can also see that what I'm actually concerned with is the actual mind space that the teacher, no matter whether they're good or mean or strong or supportive or whatever, but it's their aesthetic about clowning, which is a bit of the problem,
Mhm.
because they're e- even they may not realize it. So I'm not blaming them per se. I'm just saying this is the state of the art, that their projection about what a clown is and isn't is affecting the discovery in the room, and it's like a virus, because once that goes out to that performer that's up there trying that exercise now, and depending on what feedback's given or not given, or what's ignored, even if something beautiful has happened, and the teacher hasn't illuminated that, calling it out and recognizing it, then it goes like a virus amongst the other actors. And the actors are in a vulnerable space. It'll be the same for me or you if we were up there and somebody is telling us to do this acting exercise. We're up there doing it. We're the ones who are the vulnerable. We're on the empowered space, and we're on the vulnerable space, which is on the stage, on the studio floor. And the mind space of the teacher is much more important than is acknowledged. And that's what, again, I come back to science and quantum, and the observer affects the observed. So and of course we're touching on a very uh, topical topic about the teaching of clown, but it happens also in acting, and it happens in theater, and it happens in art. Uh, an art teacher can work all kinds of different ways as well. Um,
Absolutely. You just mentioned something really beautiful, which I also wanted to highlight, which is that actors or people who are training in acting are both in a vulnerable and an empowered space. And that's so true because I remember studying physical theater in Montreal for, I think, 6 months. And it was the best feeling I ever felt in the world, being, as we say in French, sur les planches. In other words, training, with colleagues, with other students, with an amazing teacher at the time. Um, and then what was funny is leaving class at night and walking home and then realizing that I was indeed in a very privileged space where you can be whatever you want to be and whatever mindset you want to be under the direction of a great teacher.
yes,
So it is quite special, isn't it?
yes, and it's a very special for us as humans. It's a human space, and the teacher is not a teacher if they don't have the pupils or the actors. But an actor can be an actor without a teacher and without a director. you know and so I like to reverse the psychology of the situation, and I'm a very strong teacher. I'm quite disciplined, but I can sit there unbelievably patient, and also I can tell you honestly that when I'm sitting, I never know what's going to happen, and I'm not sitting there to judge, is the person doing the exercise or my exercise the way I want it. What I'm doing is I sit there and I do not know what is going to happen. And my feedback is related to that. If the person's maybe misunderstanding something or they're missing a step, I'll just point that out. And also, if a person's really, I like to say, did you suffer for your art? I like the actors to suffer for their art because that's them exploring and discovering. But I joke about it when a person has a really hard time. And I said, well, that's good. And I said, would you like to do it again? I would say, would you like to do it again? And they might say yes, or they might say no, or they might say never. So I have this, uh, what I hope is an authentic dialogue, even though it is in a situation where I'm the one facilitating, you know. Um, but I have to say, when I give the exercise, or when the next person goes up to do the same exercise, I sit there and I'm Zen mind, beginner's mind. I do not know, I have no idea what's going to happen. And I just see what happens. And then sometimes an actor will be doing an exercise and they're gone quite down a rabbit hole. And I might say, okay, bring it to an end in 10 seconds, or bring it to an end, bring it to a closing. I might say, okay, just hold it there. And then I'll say why I stopped it. And I'll always insist that you can have a, you can do it again. Or sometimes I'll be specific. I'll say, let two more people go and you go up again. So I think it's really important that the person hasn't been bad. They haven't made something wrong. They're up there trying to discover something. So the fact that they're up there is a that's what really counts. From my
Right.
perspective, if there's something that I think is amiss, then it's up to me to also explain that or say that. But it's really important that the person can try and try and try and try again. And that bear that in mind. I have a saying. I have a lot of sayings, but I say you're already good. The question is, how do you get gooder?
That's cute.
And this is
Um,
also, let's say, my philosophy with teaching. It's not to judge a person. Are they going to be a good actor, or are they going to be a good clown? It's I'm not. That's not what I'm doing.
right. We have a couple of minutes left, so I just want to ask you one last question before we sign off here. I know that you write books, and I know that you're writing your third book, and we'll put a link to all that information. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to talk about it, but
Okay.
I wanted to know what book that you recommend to early career artists.
When you say artists, you mean performing artists, or
Sure, let's go with that. Let's say early career performing artists, they're looking for a new book to read that will either inspire them or help them in their career. What would you recommend?
okay? I'll do the obvious, and I would like to recommend my first book, which is called Clown's Secret, and there's hundreds of stories in there. So it's a book that it has some methodology in it. There's one chapter on methodology, but most of the book is actually um, true anecdotes with a purpose. But there's a lot of them, and and what happens is you get to go into uh, the experience of somebody who's been through the journey, and talking about those different passages along the way. And it's a book that I do know people that read it in one go in a week, and I know people that started in the middle, and I know people that pick and choose. I know people that loved it. I know people that hated it because it wasn't whatever they wanted to be, not necessarily performers. But the book Clown's Secret, I think, has a lot to offer, and there's nothing wrong with getting that book and skipping to the sections that you wanna read. But I think that
Yeah, I like those kinds of books.
it's about life and art. I think that's what I'm actually trying to say,
Right.
and it's really written in a living artistic way rather than in a formal way.
Beautiful. Well, listen, it's been so great to have you on the show. I know, like I said, that you are writing your third book. I'd love to have you back on when you're done writing it.
Thank you.
And it's been great to just get your thoughts and your perspective and to share more information about you with the world. So thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks a lot, Julie. I'm sorry if I spoke too much.
Not at all, not at all. It's all been fantastic. Thank you, Ira.
Thank you so much. Hi to everyone who's out there. Hello.